one of the things I started to notice in the last 15 or so years in particular was that effectively a new metaphysics, that is, a new foundational morality, appeared to be getting installed in our society. And it went something like this. And again, one can regret this or admire it, but I think most people will recognize something like it. That not very long ago, if you wanted to be seen to be an ethical or good person, there were certain things that were perhaps expected of you. Broadly speaking, they were the inheritance of the Judeo-Christian tradition. And this included things like charity, forgiveness, virtue as understood in that tradition, and a lot more. And then at some point in the last 15 years, I say sped up very clearly in the last 10 years and then weaponized in the last 5. We see this another form of morality, not totally dissimilar in some of its appearances. And that is that in order to be a good person, to be seen as a good person in a society like Australia or Britain, you would need to stress, for instance, that you were anti-racist, as if everybody else in society was profoundly racist and you were one of the few brave souls willing still to battle racism. You would need to present yourself as being entirely on the side of women in any and all circumstances and really talk about it an awful lot. You know, if you're a man, stress your feminist credentials, a tendency which, as you know from reading The Madness of Crowds, I'm intensely skeptical of. You need to talk about LGBT all the time, or at least as often as possible. And these, as well as a few other things, you might add in green and perhaps a couple of other things, became what you stress in order to show that you're a good person. Now, these in the end, I started to realize, were becoming load-bearing walls, which I became very worried about, and am very worried about, because they can't bear the load. My view is that LGBT rights, equal rights for women, equal rights for people, whatever their racial origin, is a very desirable endpoint. But it's an endpoint of liberalism in the good sense, as we might understand it. It's a hideous foundation. Why? For 2 reasons in particular. The first is that all of these bases for a new morality have intense friction among themselves. So, as I point out in the trans chapter, trans and women have intense friction as rights claims for reasons I explain. Trans and gay have intense friction between them for reasons I go into in The Madness of Crowds. But there's a second reason as well, which is that all of these things that we have been in societies like Australia trying to base our morality on are themselves much more unstable components than we've been willing to admit. So I say in the gay chapter at the outset, and I do gay at the outset partly because it's the only one of these minority things I can claim to have any crampons on the wall of the important Everest of liberal rights. Gay is much more unstable than we're willing to admit in our societies. We still don't know very much about it. I think we have to be a bit more humble about some of the issues around it as a result of that. But I get on then to the women chapter, and I say, this one also is much more unstable than we're willing to admit. Are women and men exactly equal? Are men more competent than women in certain areas? Are women more competent than men in certain areas? Or have we, just for convenience for the time being, landed, for instance, in this strange place I think we're in, where we have to pretend that women are exactly the same as men and also magically better? We're very uncertain about this. We tend to be totally certain, we're very uncertain. Race, absolute mess, which we've been trying to think about and deal with as well as we can, but there's a whole load of hell waiting for us if we keep leaning on it this hard. And then trans, which we know almost nothing about, and our societies are pretending to be incredibly certain about. And if I can sum up the problem in this in a sentence, it is that this new morality we're trying to construct relies on us pretending we know about things that we don't know about, trans, and simultaneously demands that we pretend not to know about things that we all knew till yesterday. Relations between the sexes.
It's very interesting to me that you clearly spell out the thing that you've just said in the book on gays, that there are enormous differences within each grouping under their heading, so gays, lesbians, and so forth, and enormous differences, even frictions between them.
Yes.
And in many ways, it's, I would imagine, quite deeply resented. I mean, during the gay marriage debate in Australia, anybody who was watching the debate closely could see there was quite a range of views in the gay community.
Right.
Quite a range.
Sure.
And in fact, there were quite a few who said, we've never believed in marriage. Why would we want to do it?
Yeah, there were some who said, yeah.
But of course, you didn't see that in the media. It didn't suit the narrative. You've got other people, it seems, often using, in inverted commas, these groupings that they've put together and insist are cogent and hang together to pursue agendas of their own.
Well, often to pursue a specific political objective.
Yeah.
I mean, I wrote a piece in The Spectator in the UK in support of gay marriage before it was popular to be in support of gay marriage, and explained what I regard as being the conservative case for it, which was an article which David Cameron used as a basis for his first main speech on the issue. I defend it as a right, but I also am worried by, and have been worried for a long time, by the extraordinary intolerance of elements of the so-called gay community, which I say so-called because there is no such thing.
Yeah.
I mean, you know.
So this is one of the interesting aspects of this. There must be, there are a lot of gay people who don't want to be defined by their sexuality.
Well, just
they
like,
are a whole heap of other things.
Yeah.
They're citizens, they might be Boilermakers, they might be city executives or whatever you. But suddenly there's an insistence that they define themselves.
Yeah, and this has come in very recently, and it's come in each of the ones I describe, and it's a basis for madness. When people say the gay community, who are you talking about? It's like, women think this. Oh, really? 50% of the species all agree on something. Blacks say this. Really? Now, this is, let me put it another way. If somebody said, I don't know, I just love the working class. Who?
Yeah.
I just love the middle class. Who? I love the upper class. Who are you talking about? And it's the same with this. Why would we be falling for this interpretation of society as depending solely or primarily on interest groups based on gender/sex, sexual orientation, race, and a bit more? Why would we be doing that? Why would we be taking the individualism out of individuals and lumping them in these demonstrably incoherent bodies that don't even exist? They don't even exist. The LGBT community. Take me to your leader. Come on.
I suppose in a way, you know, in public office, the thing that would have struck me about so much of this is that it actually ends up dividing us hopelessly. Yes. So we're forever focusing on our differences, on the things that divide us as citizens, rather than the things that unite us and that we have in common.
What if that's the point?
Well,
what if that's the point?
Yeah. So that's your second chapter is really on
the Marxist.
On the Marxist thing. Now, this pulling together of disparate groups who have grievances that can be stoked and sort of, if you like, used as battering rams for political objectives, often without them probably even realising that in a sense they're being used, that perhaps they're the modern version of Lenin's useful idiots.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a pattern in all of this. As I say in that chapter, you can see the intellectual underpinnings. And they come from this idea that it's a Marxist idea, but it's just transferred to the modern era, where instead of talking about society in class structures, you talk about it in minority interest group structures. And you lump people like this. What is the primary aim of this? Among other things, it is a different interpretation of society, which is therefore intended to segregate and pull apart societies as you and I might understand them. So that people's primary affiliation is not that I'm an Australian or I'm British, but I'm a member of the LGBT community in the Greater Sydney area, for instance. You can predict with 100% accuracy the people who encourage this, the people who will grab the latest claim by an interest group and run with it. And it is always people who in the past had another way of trying to attack our societies, had a radical Marxist view of the world, for instance. We know this with the green issue where, and again, like the rights issues I write about in this book, they succeed because they're not onto nothing, you know. The green movement is onto something with the environment and with our planet. But it has this hideous red interior which keeps exposing itself as desiring not a better relationship between ourselves and our environment, but, for instance, the end of capitalism.
Yeah.
And it's the same with this. I expose in each of the chapters that the people who make it repeatedly and desperately plain, that they believe, for instance, that being a woman should be merely the first step in a wider mission to bring down capitalism. Now, I don't think most women are on board with that, and most women would be rather surprised to be utilized in this fashion. But that is very clearly and explicitly, and I quote the various scholars and writers who've been pushing this for years, this is explicitly the aim. And it's why, as I say, you can always predict exactly who is going to latch onto the latest claim. When, for instance, the big bearded man with male genitalia wins the women's weightlifting competition, you can predict with 100% accuracy who is going to say, yeah, what's the problem with that? And the people who are going to say, I'm not sure Clive the big weightlifter should be winning the women's category. You can predict it. And the people who say, why have you got a problem with that, bigot, are always the same people who believed in the past that our societies needed to be pulled apart in another fashion. And now they'd like to do it in this fashion.
Thank you for watching this episode. We appreciate your support. If you value vital conversations like this one, be sure to subscribe to the channel there and also click the notification bell to stay up to date with new releases.